Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Welcome, and we are live finally with the Amin Muslim American analysis. We are joined here by Dr. Abdul Majid Katranji, the Amin president, and myself, your brother Rex Nazarko, the American Muslim Engagement and Empowerment Network executive director. Today, we are going to be analyzing this very razor-thin electoral map, the impact of the Muslim vote, and what the election means from the Muslim American perspective. Dr. Katranji, thank you for joining us. Lead us a little bit through what kind of impact can the Muslim vote have in these specific swing states that we see in North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada.
So, alhamdulillah, you can see that this is a battle of margins, right? So no one won the states, these border states, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona. Here's Arizona, there's Nevada. Am I missing a state? Pennsylvania, right? Mm-hmm. So no one won these states in 2020 by this huge landslide margin.
Right.
And if you're comparing the 2016 numbers to the 2020 numbers, everything was just about one group of voting. Where are they? How are they? What's going on? How do they feel? Mm-hmm. So there was a largely neglected group this year by some parties in terms of the Muslim Americans, right?
Okay.
They didn't feel like they were big enough, substantial enough, or had an impact on the percentages enough. But if we're going to let's bring up a state like Georgia, where there's a rising Muslim population in there. Okay, this is a state, all right, that Donald Trump was looking for 11,000 votes. Now you're looking at, nope, he's in the lead at 52.2%. So his lead is slowly extending here.
I do want to emphasize 80% of the votes are counted. Usually the lagger in Georgia is Atlanta, and that's where we see most of that late tabulation coming in.
But if you go to Atlanta, let's go to Atlanta right there. Okay, Fulton County, 80% of the votes are counted. So that lag isn't as substantial as one would, as let's say the Democratic Party would be hoping for.
Right.
But here's what you got to look at is that in Atlanta, yes, there's a sizable Democratic Party. There's also a sizable Muslim community that's there. So it's not about just winning county by county, right?
Yeah,
you got to win the popular vote. And it's those numbers that they didn't tabulate. They didn't take into consideration that they're seeing that difference in.
Right. And by the way, for the folks watching, there's about 175,000 Muslims who live in Georgia currently.
Correct.
Most of them centered in the Atlanta area. There has been a nationwide call for Muslims to protest Vice President Harris due to her policies and enabling of the genocide in Gaza and the expansion of the war in Israel in Lebanon by enabling Israel's policies, essentially. So we might be seeing here potentially a breaking rank of the Muslim vote that historically for at least the past two elections has voted in large margins with the Democratic Party to either Donald Trump or the third party, which is Jill Stein. Now, the Stein factor is still to be counted, and in a few of the key states like Georgia or like Michigan, Muslims have essentially used the third party as a vote to show their discontent with the Democratic Party, to show that Kamala Harris did not earn the Muslim vote. Therefore, they are voting for what a lot of community members have been calling the better alternative, and saying that we will not be voting for the lesser of two evils.
To be clear, like the Muslim vote isn't monolith, right? We do know that there are going to be Muslims are going to be voting Republican, Muslims that are going to be voting Democrat, and we want that. We want the community to be engaged. You want to be involved with every level. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to be just the party of one group, but in large part, elections are about not just about electing people to be nominated or to be voted in to take office or take power. Elections are also about messages. You got to send a message. It's not just about do I like Kamala or do I like Donald Trump or do I like Jill Stein. It's about why did I behave the way I did this electoral cycle, and if you want my support the next time around, what do you need to do to come around?
So this has been one of the calls. I mean, there's a lot at stake for Muslims, but also for the larger anti-war movement that has built since October 7th began unfolding in Gaza. So this is actually a critical election to reshape the entire framework of American political discussion.
Well, and beyond that, let's face it. In terms of the larger American perspective, right? The economy has been the number one issue. Okay?
Correct.
Even for Muslim Americans, for a lot of them, if you're going to ask them, the economy is the number one issue. But let's talk about the economy. You had a devastating hurricane that devastated several parts of the southern states, right? Where's the money? Where's the rally? Where's the big funding bill that's coming out of Congress to help support our fellow Americans that for some of them, even today, while they're trying to get elected, they still don't even have electricity to get to their polls so that they go to an alternative location or they're looking for something that says, hey, look, if you're willing to give $60 billion to Israel, why don't you give $180 billion to us? We're the taxpayers. We need the help right now. We're here locally. So the economy is the issue, right? So in large part, the position from the Muslim American community is simply saying this: we need to have a reanalysis of our foreign policy, not simply just as an issue of foreign policy, but a matter of domestic policy. What are our priorities as a country? And I think that's a lot of that voting. It's not just simply a single issue, but it's a matrix of concept. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes the Muslim voter a very powerful voter, not just for this election, but for future elections to come. Because remember, you have a community that has some liberal principles on economy, some conservative principles on social demographics, such as parental rights. And then in large part, they do see things as a multidimensional world, not a single issue. And I think for a lot of parties, they make a critical error of just assuming that this group of voter is going to behave one way or that way, one way or another, just simply on one issue. It's much more dynamic. Let's go to Michigan.
So can I actually, before we go to Michigan, can we go to North Carolina real quick? Omar, if you can switch to North Carolina, because you mentioned the hurricane. And I think there is an argument to be made here about the hurricane vote.
Correct.
And there's a lot of people who have felt some huge dissatisfaction with the way that the Biden-Harris administration handled the situation that unfolded after the hurricane just a couple weeks ago. This is the current situation in North Carolina.
Right.
About 68% of the votes have been counted. Trump is leading by almost 200,000 votes. Now we have to look at some of the key counties of where the vote is still. For Charlotte, for example, in North Carolina, which is a strong Democratic stronghold, only 20% of the vote is counted. So we're expecting some of that ground to be made up. If we look at Johnson County, 7%. Wake County, this is a big Democratic district. 74% of the vote has been counted. So there's an argument to be made that potentially the Democrats are not performing as strong as they thought they would with a lot of this vote.
Absolutely. I mean, look at it. Donald Trump, 176,000 votes. If you're looking at some of the other areas, if you're looking at comparisons to Donald Trump 2016, 2020, you're actually finding that some of these numbers where, yes, she may win a particular county, that's her position, but you're finding actually Donald Trump is actually bringing in some of that margin isn't as wide as expected, and that's always difficult for the Democrats as they're looking for a pathway to victory electorally. Similarly, as Republicans now may be worried in terms of what's going on in Philadelphia, in terms of the numbers as they're playing. But that frustrated vote in North Carolina is playing a key role. One of the number one issue for North Carolinians for voting today was the economy. And what was related to the economy? The fact that they're still suffering from the hurricane, and there are issues to the hurricane that need to be resolved, and it's not getting resolved fast enough. It's the single largest issue, and that's going to play a tremendous impact on the demographic of the vote.
Now, can we quickly pivot over to Michigan, because we want to break down a little bit of the voter analysis that we have currently seen being unfolded in the state. Now, Michigan is one of the states, I have to emphasize, we are constantly seeing Donald Trump actually narrow the gap. This was about a 8% gap, and it has narrowed to 3%. We see that Kamala is leading by about 20,000 votes, which is actually...
And only
17% has been counted. Now, if we look at the map down here, obviously Wayne County is still 1% of the voting reported, with Donald Trump narrowly in the lead. We expect that to change. Wayne County is a strong Democratic stronghold historically. We look at Oakland County. Oakland County is where Democrats perform well usually. We see 43.8% of the vote has gone to Donald Trump. This is not in line with the trends of 2016 and 2020. It may be in line with the trends of 2016, I might be mistaken, but with 2020, we saw a larger margin of victory from Joe Biden. If we look at Washtenaw County real quick, right here. Nope, right here. That's Wayne County. Right in this area.
Right there.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
So 60% of the vote has been reported. 31%. This is looking very typical, right? We have seen Jill Stein gain about 2,000 votes in Washtenaw County so far. Keep in mind, this is where Ann Arbor is located, so the student vote is maybe one of these factors contributing to the Jill Stein voting
look at
rising.
this. So we've got 60% of the votes counted. Okay, look at the margins: 66%, 32%. If you looked at some of the studies, the data, and the statistics that was coming out there, that Biden won this particular county, I think 73 to 78%. So this is a significant underperformance on the Democratic Party side. And remember that for the Muslim American community, they were directly impacted by what went on in Washtenaw County,
Right.
by the absolute neglect of the protesters that were there, from the perspective that the university was unwilling to engage, and at the same time how they ended up shutting down that protest, and then the subsequent act by a Democratic Attorney General to then proceed to prosecute the protesters. And by the way, these protesters weren't all Muslim. They were from different communities. They were Jewish, they were Muslim, they were American, they were white, they were different colors, different backgrounds, all protesting for what they were seeing. So you can see that that's going to play a role. That has an impact on the thinking. And Ann Arbor is a very, very progressive city.
It's a
right?
very I
progressive
would call
city.
it the liberal heart of Michigan,
Correct.
actually. So this is a little bit surprising. I mean, it's in line with what historically Ann Arbor's voting trends are. I believe there is definitely slight gains from the Trump Trump campaign
that margin
here.
tells you that he's definitely taken a step forward.
There's been a big chip happening, whether this is, centered around a lot of issues that still remains to be seen, but there seems to be some massive desertion of the Democratic Party happening in a statewide fashion. And if we look here, the gap with 18% of the vote just narrowed again. It's about 18,000 votes.
And mind you, Wayne County is always going to be the last county to report, so these numbers obviously change. But what you're seeing is that some people are going to ask, like, well, does your vote make a difference? That if you did protest or didn't protest?
Right.
Well, you have to understand it does make a difference, because electoral politics and voting in general, it's about the margin. It's about those percentages. Even if you win and you say, haha, well, I did finally win. If you win by 0.5%, that's not a victory, because you're barely holding on, and there's always another election every other year. So within 2 years, you're going to have the midterms, and this is going to be renegotiated and redebated. So the importance here of the dynamic in terms of the Muslim American vote and the American vote as a whole is the number one issue affecting them all is economy. That's the number one.
Common ground.
Common ground that we all as American have. And then for the Muslim American vote, the issue and the dynamic, then the dimensionality is not just economy, but how foreign policy plays, not only impacting the economy of the United States, but its economy and the global position as a whole. Certainly immigration also plays a role. So therefore, you're going to find some people, they may actually lean back to the Democratic Party,
right,
because they're going to say, you know what, I'm worried about immigration. I'm worried about the status of individuals to come here. So
this is one of the factors that the Democratic Party has, I would say, overplayed in Michigan, is the Trump fear factor.
Correct.
Especially when talking to particular communities like the Muslim community, one of the ways to either mobilize or paralyze has been to reinsert the boogeyman of Trump into the conversation. Now, Muslim Americans are not naive
Correct.
about who Trump is. We had Trump for 4 years. We've directly felt the impact of the Trump administration as a community for those 4 years.
Correct.
But it is quite telling. By the way, I do not want to neglect the Jill Stein factor. There's already 7,500 votes that have gone to Jill Stein in an election that has a difference of about 18,000 votes.
25,000.
It went up,
Yep.
25,000, right?
Yep, they just
So we're
updated.
seeing the numbers, but this could very well be what gives someone the presidency or loses someone the presidency. And it is centered entirely around the conversation that Gaza should have been handled correctly by the Biden-Harris administration. I think Muslim Americans in the reports that we are seeing here are already playing a very significant role in Michigan's political landscape. We are showing that Michigan is not going to go solidly from one party to another. Regardless of who wins this election, I think the Muslim and the coalition vote has ensured that Michigan will remain swing. Very likely.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that right now, when you're looking at these numbers and how tight the race is, Michigan is going to be not only in play in this election, it's going to be in play in future elections. So for any type of Democratic strategist or Republican strategist, they're going to have to consider that. Like let's take a look at another area. Let's go to Macomb County right there. Okay.
Right up here.
So right now it says 0% of the votes. There's actually been a delay in what's going on in Macomb County. They had to extend. There was so much energy to go vote, and the lines were so long they actually had to extend the time in polls to let the people in line get the chance to vote. And so therefore we're going to slowly start seeing those numbers, and that's a really important county to understand because Macomb is the home of the classic Reagan Democrat, right? They can be Democrats, but they can vote very mixed. So the strategy here is, and when you're going to see these numbers, is what has been the messaging, how did it play when it came to people voting in this election, in this election cycle.
And I want to show people's attention to Georgia. It just moved, but it showed about almost 200,000. Yeah, if you could go to Georgia real quick, Omar, a little bit further down. Nope, further up, right there.
Yeah.
So we see a difference of 200,000 votes in Georgia. 82% of the vote has been counted. Georgia, I want to emphasize to our viewers, is where the Democrats have heavily invested in what they call the Stacey Abrams factor, the organizing factor and the mobilizing factor of turning out voters, and they were hoping for Georgia to actually turn blue. Now, that did not happen in 2020, as far as I know. It doesn't look like it's going to happen again. So I want to speak to a larger factor here, because we've seen the same kind of strategy and trend being played in Michigan by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party spent millions of dollars in ground game in Michigan, hoping to turn out new voters to replace the Muslim desertion that was happening and the coalition desertion. I want to emphasize that this movement is not just a Muslim movement. There's been a lot of people who have conscious and have sided with the Gaza factor, is what I would call. There is a direct vote that expresses the discontent with, and by the way, Jill Stein in Georgia, 13,000 votes, 0.3%. We also see
you're far
that
more likely to see a libertarian.
Right, correct.
Votes,
yeah, I mean, and that's usually what's going to happen in a predominantly red southern
let's
state.
Let's look at another state in which Muslims play a role, right? Pennsylvania, because you have a large Muslim population in Philadelphia, right? So can we head over to Pennsylvania?
Yep, a little further down.
And don't forget, my brothers and sisters in Wisconsin, we haven't forgotten you. We'll
Right
get you there. We'll get there in a second. We'll take a look at Arizona in a moment here too.
So 52% of the vote has been counted. Donald Trump is leading Pennsylvania with, I am not good at math here, but it seems at least
looks like about
60,000 votes. 60,000
yep.
votes in maybe high 50s.
Actually, that's probably more like 75,000. Like it's approaching 70,000.
Right.
Votes,
So
right?
it's about 70,000.
Yep.
I'm not a mathematician.
No
Okay,
worries.
so, but yeah, Trump is actually leading. Let's go and look at the county's votes remaining. So 42% of the vote has been counted in Philadelphia County. Very considerable lead by Vice President Harris, which is extremely
but again,
expected.
the question isn't that we know Philadelphia County is going to go Democrat. So the question here is, how many people are actually going to come out for Trump? Like, what is that number, right? So what is that margin that's there? If we know, for instance, that he can bring out an extra 10,000 votes here, 5,000 votes there, 10,000, then Donald Trump has
this is what Trump has played, because originally we saw a lot of hesitancy from Republicans to engage with the early voting process in 2020. It was still novel to them, and President Trump himself was casting a lot of doubt on the early voting. But this year, he took a directly different strategy. He encouraged Republicans to early vote. Democrats have been banking on this idea that the early vote is predominantly going to go Democrat, and they're hoping that it's a really high turnout for them. That may not necessarily be the case. Percentage-wise, nationwide, there was a lot of reporting happening from different polls and sources that the Republicans had increased their margin more than the Democrats had. Now, the Democrats are still voting early more than the Republicans are. But to your point, it's about not what Trump wins or loses. It's about what Trump gains in terms of ground.
Correct.
And it's looking like potentially in this early voting process, which I believe about 45% of voters, for example, in Michigan voted early, the turnout may not be entirely predominantly Democrat. which is going to be a very interesting analysis people are going to have after elections.
And that was actually the most important thing to realize, is that with the economy being the number one factor, the number one group that you've got to count are the independents, right? And intriguing enough, like for Muslim Americans, many of them are not registered Democrats or not registered Republicans. They're actually independents, like so many Americans are independents. Usually the numbers are between 30 to 36% of Americans identify as independent. That is a critical voting demographic that people have to understand. And there was this hope that, for instance, with the abortion issue, those independent women would then vote for the Democratic Party. But in terms of immigration and in terms of the border security, that the independent men would vote for instance, the Democratic Party. For the Republican Party. But what you're seeing as it plays here is that it's actually far more again, multidimensional than just one or two or three issues. With the economy, it's always the economy. Every election is about the economy. It never changes. And that ultimately becomes that matrix factor. That, okay, how's my situation today? And in large part, in the matrix of all things that are important to me, am I going to be better off next week with this person in charge, or actually in 3 months with this person in charge or that person in charge? So let's go to Wisconsin. Can we look at Wisconsin real quick?
So President Trump is leading in Wisconsin with about
47% of the votes counted. And he's got just about, what, a 13,000
vote lead, 12,000 some hundred votes. This is razor thin in Wisconsin.
And you can see the margin issues here, right? Because for both candidates, Donald Trump as it pertains to Robert Kennedy, Kamala Harris as it pertains to Jill Stein, you can actually see the issues that they're facing here. Wisconsin refused. The Supreme Court refused to let them or let Robert Kennedy withdraw his name from the ballot. So you can see that ballot impact. And that 0.5%, just 13,000 votes is a difference. You can see that, okay, if you add these two totals, that's 15,000 votes. There's the margin, and that's where, for instance, communities like the Muslim American community, that's where they rest. And one of the themes, right? They are not only they can be, but they are the margin of victory. You get 13, 14, 15,000 of them in Macomb County in Michigan, in let's say Green Bay in Wisconsin. That can be the difference for you to become the next president of the United States or not. And we're seeing this play again and again and again. Can we take a look at Arizona?
Yep. So about 16,000 lead for Vice President Harris in Arizona. Yep. Arizona is one of those states that basically went to the very last day of counting last election cycle.
We had to wait.
I believe Maricopa County was one of the key counties. We can see here on this side that a large chunk of the vote is still to be counted. But if you look, this is actually astonishing. This was not the margin that President Biden was. So this is actually much closer than 2020. It looks like
much tighter, much
tighter. This is about a 2-point race. So overall, what we're looking in this general electoral map is that the race is still anyone's race,
and that's why
nothing has been determined.
That's why for the Muslims, where they're telling me, like, can I make a difference for Gaza? Are you going to make a difference immediately? No, but can you change policy? Can you influence who gets to get elected to be able to make those decisions? Absolutely, because you can see if this is as tight as 16,000 votes, you better know. Like, for instance, in a well-organized community action movement in Phoenix, you can deliver those 16,000 votes to one or the other person and be instrumental in them becoming president of the United States. That gives you tremendous leverage to be able to communicate, to deliver the message, and not only that, to participate in policy so that things can be understood, can be better tuned to really understand the human dimension of people suffering, not just abroad, but also here in the United States.
Right. So we see with about 60% of the vote in Oakland County, now back to Michigan, Kamala Harris has actually lost ground. Last time we checked here, there was about a 41% vote for Donald Trump. It's up to 44 now, and is essentially 50,000 votes that are separating the two in Oakland County, which in the last 2 elections has gone blue. This shows you, and can we look at Jill Stein? Jill Stein has 4188. That may very well be. There is about 40,000 Muslims who live in Oakland County, I believe. Now, I have to emphasize that's not 40,000 registered voters. That's 40,000 Muslims. This may very well be the Muslim factor right here.
Absolutely.
And in Oakland County, depending on how this unfolds, this could be what decides the election. Now, I'm gonna pivot over to Brother Jailani Hussein, who's the one of the co-founders of the Abandon Biden movement and also the executive director of CARE Minnesota. Brother Jailani, why don't you break down a little bit the situation in Minnesota, especially with how it pertains to the Muslim vote? We've seen quite interesting dynamics come out of Minnesota, especially with regards to the Somali community.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. And this is a very interesting year, perhaps one of the most interesting elections for American Muslims. We are talking about it as it's happening. This is probably unique because for the first time, I think the American Muslim community, no matter where they are, and here particularly in Minnesota, I think we like to say in Minnesota, probably have the most engaged and politically active Muslims. We have one of the highest voter turnout, as well as for Muslims. Some of our lower income, lower class community members, and so local, lower socioeconomic community members. Minnesota, what we have noticed is that there's been unfortunately somewhat a seismic shift toward Trump, and so we're detecting that right now. It's very early right now to even determine with only 5%
Yeah, we see about
coming in.
3% of the votes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what we have heard of the last few weeks, and it's been reported in our on our state paper, that about 30 to 40% of individuals in one of our most concentrated area have been voting for Trump. And this was actually someone who is not a Muslim who did that kind of a survey and said that in 2020, only one door was voting for Trump, when in 2024, 35 to 40% of those same doors that they were calling on were now voting for Trump. So we will see how those numbers play out. Minnesota was
This
very
is a seismic
close.
shift.
And
It
Jailani,
is,
are
and
you feeling when you look at this? Are you seeing this as a shift in terms of that this is really coming from the Muslim sector as as a protest or as a message vote?
it is. I mean, what we are actually hoping that does not happen, but we have been hearing about it, is a large number of Muslims are actually detaching themselves from the process and are not voting because of protest vote, and because they felt that somehow their last vote for Biden, they didn't expect that Biden would be in this situation where that vote is now the reason why the disaster that we're seeing, the genocide that is doing. So genocide is playing a huge impact. But also, genocide is not the only issue. We have a lot of Muslims right now who are moving through the social economic ladder. Many of them are now entrepreneurs. They're truck drivers. They're other people who are suffering from the economic challenges that many Americans are suffering from. So we've had actually a couple of times where I had reporters follow me, and while Gaza was issue number one, issue number two is actually economics. And so
Right. And
many people
that's
are
been the trend that
choosing.
Dr. Katranji spoke to.
Exactly. And so it's still too early, but I will say that Jill Stein will take a large percentage. I'm interested in figuring out 20 years and under what that number will look like for Jill Stein, particularly. Minnesota has one of the highest uncommitted vote, 19%. In less than 2 weeks, we were able to turn out 40,000 people, which represented 19% of the Democratic primary voters. So it's going to be interesting to see. But right now, as you're hearing nationally, the numbers are starting to look a lot more that genocide has significant impact on this presidential election.
I mean, you've been part of the abandoned. You initiated the abandoned Biden
Right.
movement,
Right.
and given the extent and the depth of your expertise on this, obviously the issue of genocide and the assault on the Palestinian people, the brutality to the children of the Palestinian people, the disability, the amputations, beyond just simply the horror of death, the absolute devastation of an entire infrastructure. Even, for instance, as recently as last week, a polio vaccination effort to try to save the lives of people, to give them at least some semblance of quality for a future, and they get struck by, I believe, IDF forces. that clearly played a huge role for the abandoned Biden movement. Now, in the larger picture that you're seeing and what you're seeing in the electoral trend, are you seeing that the movement that you started now is manifesting itself in these swing states into those different components that where we're seeing why it's so razor thin, and to some degree Trump is gaining advantage because of it?
Absolutely. And I think, naturally starting that early in Minnesota here in late October, and November 1st is when we declared that we are abandoning Biden in Minnesota. Because again, Minnesota's Muslim population in the middle of October were already feeling disgusted. I remember an imam specifically coming to me and saying, is there a way for me to get my ballot back? Because I want to destroy it. That ballot that he voted to support Biden. That was a conversation we were having in the middle of October. And so when we initially launched it in Minnesota, it was a second nature because the Muslim community here was disgusted. They felt that their vote was misused because the president was unable to say the word ceasefire. We weren't even asking for him to actually commit to a ceasefire. Just say the words. He was refusing. And we as a community felt that we had to respond. So, so anyways, absolutely. And so what happened is, we had a meeting with some folks that we could capture at that time. And the sentiment was very normal that most people believed that genocide was going to have an impact and abandoning Biden was the right decision. And then it became wildfire. I mean, we have leaders across the entire country. Many Muslims believe, and in fact, because of so early, we saw uncommitted, which is a derivative of abandoned Biden. We saw some of the other things that are happening, which now led to the point where in your state, we didn't anticipate in 2020, and perhaps now most of us probably did not predict that President Trump would be running around chasing Muslims in Michigan in hopes of winning your vote. I mean, this is a sign that the American Muslim political power is real. We have the control, and in this tonight, it's going to be evident. And when the dust settles, genocide and the Muslim community will be part of the story to tell about this.
So we have already made a statement as a community. Not only have we made a statement, we have actually seismically reshifted the conversation. The Muslim issues are on the table. Genocide is on the table. Regardless of who wins or loses this race, the pressure was there. We held the party's toes to the fire. And I think that's a very substantial achievement from our community as it catapults itself into an era of no longer playing defensive, I would say. We are no longer... Yes, please, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is huge for a top, yes, for a top presidential candidate. For yeah. I want to shift your attention to Michigan very briefly. Yes, please, please. Yes. Yes. Which is it's massive. Yes, absolutely. And I want to shift your attention to Michigan, as 23% of the votes have been reported. President Trump has now taken the lead. He is in the lead by about 5,000 votes. We see Jill Stein has 8,552 votes, which could very well have been a determining factor at this stage of the counting for Kamala Harris to be in the lead. I just want to emphasize that. A large chunk of this is coming from the Muslims breaking rank with the Democratic Party, which we have loyally voted for 20 years, and positioning ourselves into essentially no man's land at this point. which is a very risky thing to do, but is also something that the community actively chose to take upon themselves. I believe we may be losing you. Yes, you're back on.
Are you with us, Jelani? Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Yes, please. Assalamu alaikum, Imam Hassan.
Imam Hassan.
So please speak to us a little bit of the situation that you are seeing unfold and to how the Muslim vote is really reshaping American electoral politics. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think the biggest factor that you're seeing is that Muslim Americans in general no longer afraid to be Muslim, no longer ashamed to be American. They're just it's one and the same.
They're taking ownership
They're
of this
taking
process.
ownership of their identity, and I think that's a huge benefit, not just only for the community itself, but for the country as a whole.
Yes. And I think we're actively seeing that play out today.
And the horror of any genocide, it spills over to the borders, right? The people of Lebanon, the people of Yemen, even.
Imam, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And inshallah, the Muslim community in Michigan and Minnesota is able to be the decisive factor in this election. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
So we want to reshift our attention back to the map in Michigan right now. We see that the dynamics of the numbers are moving very rapidly back and forth. One of the reasons we see President Trump take a narrow lead has been due to some of the counties in the Upper Peninsula starting to report their vote. At the same time, if we go to Macomb and Oakland County, I want to see the numbers reporting from there so far.
I mean, look at
so
Macomb.
We have Macomb County right here, razor thin.
Yeah.
This is literally 3,000 votes.
And only 11% right now so far accounted.
So the Macomb County, as Dr. Katranji emphasized, is one of those key Reagan Democrat counties that usually swings purpose. Jaydani, I don't know if you're seeing this from Minnesota as well, but the map in Michigan is extremely dynamic right now. Obviously, Wayne County has not really started reporting yet, and this is an area that the Trump campaign invested heavily in, also with the Muslim factor. This is where we saw the Muslim imams endorsing him from predominantly the Hamtramck and Detroit area. This is also an area where Vice President Harris has actively tried to replace the Muslim desertion vote with cultivating new voters. We also have a very sizable amount of African American Muslims living in Wayne County.
Correct.
This community is also going to be one of the key factors as to who wins the Michigan electorate. So clearly, us not being a monolith is putting pressure on a lot of the parties. This is something that we are noticing. The African American Muslims have not been as easy to kind of pin down in terms of what their voting trends are going to be and whatnot.
Jaylani,
So
you come from Minnesota, so obviously you have tremendous leaders. Ilhan Omar, obviously elected representative to the House, and then Keith Ellison, another Muslim American Attorney General from Minnesota. How are you finding in terms of the outreach, in terms of the African American vote, especially for instance African American males or Muslim Americans from African background, whether black or African? MashaAllah.
Inshallah. Mm-hmm. Assalamu alaikum. How are you, Sister Sadia?
Well,
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
How are you doing?
Yeah. I think everyone is on edge, with different expectations and whatnot. But I think if there's one factor that we can speak to and we've spoken to is that Muslims are showing up. So what is the number? Sorry, what is the number of Muslims in Minnesota?
MashaAllah.
So the Yeah, so the dynamism of what you just spoke to the growth of the Muslim community seems to actually also be directly reflected on the ballot this year. Speak to us a little bit about the power of Minnesota Muslims, how they got to where they got. Number one, number two, we have seen and we have heard reports, especially within the Somali community in Minnesota, that there is desertion happening from the Democratic Party. Oh, sister, I'm sorry, we're having a technical problem, so we're going to have to figure that out and then we'll come right back to you.
Take care, Sister. Thank you for everything. Assalamu. Thank you. Assalamu. All right. Yeah, we got.
Are we good?
Yep. All right. So right now we're going to be looking at the next update here. Again, Donald Trump still in the lead right now in Michigan, 738,275 votes to 708. So a 20,000 vote lead. Again, still early. 25% of the votes counted. So we're looking at we're looking at just at how tight this race is. It just got updated again. So now it's a 40,000 vote lead. So you could see that as the night keeps going through, this race continues to be razor thin, very difficult to call. Can we go to the global map? Let's just see where we're at.
Yes.
Virginia is amazing, right? Virginia has been blue for
solid blue.
So this is just telling you just how tight the election process is right now in Virginia. 1.7 for Kamala, 1.676 for Donald. So what is it? Only a difference of about 54,000 votes. This is extremely telling, and still a lot of votes yet to be counted. You'd expect that by this stage, with some of the Fairfax County, some of the more liberal areas in Virginia, or the Democratic sectors of Virginia, you'd expect that margin to be much wider. But listen, I mean, the issues that are affecting Americans in Michigan are affecting Americans in Virginia and all across. So you can see just how tight this election is. If we can go to the just overall map,
So,
okay, and so you can see right now.
so the way this is looking right now, if this continues, Donald Trump is at the White House. Now, obviously, the night is going to be long. These results are very preliminary. A lot of the major counties with large Democratic votes have not been counted. So, including Michigan, Wayne County is actually reporting 1% of the vote being counted, which is absolutely.
Which is par for the course for Wayne County, by the way. So
Yeah,
we will see a better number, I believe, by 11:30.
Yeah, we will be. The infrastructure around Wayne County's counting mechanisms is extremely lacking, but that's something that we will have to speak to at a later time. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Yeah, let's look at Arizona.
Are all
Arizona
trending red right now.
Yeah, right now red, right? So all the swing states,
And
exactly.
it is a
every single swing state right now. If the election were to stop right now, it would be a sweep.
so this is 50,000 of the votes counted. Donald Trump has taken a lead of about 2,500 votes.
Yep.
So can we actually explore Arizona?
Can we look
a
at
little
Nevada?
further?
Yep, Nevada still hasn't reported yet. So let's look at Arizona.
So Jill Stein, 7,000 votes. Easily could be the margin that gives Kamala that election.
That absolutely. And again, Chase Oliver, obviously libertarian, but again, that's a fairly stable voting number that's over there. But you're looking at Jill Stein, that 7,000. You can see that's going to play a tremendous role because typically, if you look at the election from 2016, there was a protest vote against Hillary Clinton from within the Democratic Party. They largely voted third party. They largely voted green. In 2020, that protest vote did not exist. So therefore, that was the margin, again, where Biden was able to take a lot of the states that Trump could not recapture for his reelection bid here. Now we're looking at 2024. Again, the same issues are playing out. And because this race is so tight, that 7,000 votes can make a huge difference. Let's look at Maricopa County real quick.
Yep, the largest county.
Yeah,
in the
there we
state.
go. I mean, just look at how tight that is. No
Razor thin.
one would expect. This is a Democratic stronghold. You have
Yes.
Phoenix, Arizona, 54%. So there's still a lot of votes to be counted. Still a lot of precincts to be reported.
Yes.
But that's much tighter than if I was a Democratic strategist.
And again, I want
to
to point out Jill Stein, 4,500 votes. This could easily, in the end, make the difference. This is how razor thin most of these races are looking right now.
Can you come down to Tucson down here? The lower. Yep. So we're looking at Pima County again. So this is actually more of the range. Okay, so a little bit more normal in terms of that voting percentage, but you can still see still a very tight race. And again, you like you said, the Jill Stein factor. 1,000 votes. If it gets any tighter, that 1,000 votes could be anywhere else,
Right.
And that could be the difference
Statewide,
in terms of
that could
victory.
be yep.
Statewide.
So can we look at the nationwide map right now? Yes.
What does Georgia look like right now? What do we got in Georgia right now?
That's South Carolina.
I think South Carolina was already declared.
I think that's a solid red. Yep, Georgia right there. So Georgia, President Trump is leading by 100.
90% of the votes counted, though. This is really important. So that margin.
So we have to see, right? If we go to Atlanta, how many? 88%. How many votes are still left to be counted? This is the mathematics, right? President Trump is up by 142,000 votes. Can the Democrats make up that difference with what is left in Georgia?
And the key here is it did tighten up a little bit, right?
Yes.
That number did tighten up, but again, that number was a bit wider for President Biden than it is right now for Vice President Harris. So we believe it was almost 78%. This is right now at 72%, so it's not playing.
Jill Stein is 15,700 votes in Georgia. This could very well, as those Democratic stronghold votes are coming in, probably going to narrow this gap a little further. This could have been the margin of victory for the Democrats.
Let's look at some of the southern counties here. Let's see how they've reported here, where we're at in terms of percentages. Right there. Okay, 99%. Let's take a look over here. Yep, right there. Yep, perfect.
99%.
Okay, 99% of the votes.
So we can see the reporting right here. If you go right below Augusta.
Uncounted vote. Yep.
Yep. So right below Augusta, a little further up, right here. Right there.
Burke
Okay,
County?
so this is
Only 4%.
4%, right? Burke County is 4%. There's a lot more votes still coming in. This gap is gonna narrow. No, I think it's worth emphasizing that no major predictions have been made about any of the swing states
Correct.
so far,
Correct.
which is in line with what national polling was speaking to. So how do the Muslims perceive this? How do the Muslims perceive this dynamic right now? What are we feeling as a
I
community?
think in large part Muslims are feeling well. I mean, like, my vote really counts, right? Everything's so tight. Now you're thinking like, thank God I voted. So however you voted, and again, the idea here, the most important thing that we're encouraging everybody is vote. Every election, vote. But you got to feel right now, wow, like me going there, me waiting in line for 3 or 4 hours, me re-registering, me communicating with my friends, posting on Facebook, trying to encourage being involved in things like that. Because you could see this isn't an issue of where you're seeing a margin of 300, 400,000 votes in almost every state that we're looking at. Everything's coming down to 10 to 12 to 15,000 votes. That's a Eid prayer, right? You just you rent one of the convention centers. That's a Eid prayer. There you go. There's a difference. So you can see that for the Muslim American, and obviously for the Americans as a whole, that vote counts. That makes a difference. The community that you represent, the values that you're advocating for, you have power. This is your power to strengthen your initiative. And win or lose, what you're going to discover here is that if it's this tight, and it's been this tight since 2016, that means every election is a challenge. Every election then is an opportunity for the Muslim American community specifically, and for for all Americans as a whole, to really advance their cause and their position, and really demand of their elected representatives better outcomes and better results.
So I think one of the key things that Muslims are witnessing right now is how is their vote, whichever way it has gone through, whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's Donald Trump, or whether it's Jill Stein or Chase Oliver, how has their vote impacted the dynamic of the election? I think with the numbers that we have, about 175,000 Muslims in Georgia, right? Now, not all of those are registered voters, but there's a sizable chunk that could be the determining factor in this election. One thing that should not be underestimated is through this, Muslims need to be extremely aware that they are the margin of victory. And this election, whether you voted for the Democrats, whether you voted for the Republicans, whether you want one of these candidates to win, collectively, as a community, I think we can acknowledge that we have the chance to be powerful in this country.
Absolutely.
Not just to represent the voice of the voiceless in Gaza and Lebanon, but to also represent the voice of domestic issues. We have been at the forefront of domestic fights, things like freedom of speech, things like
the First Amendment, right?
Correct.
This is right. The biggest thing about protesting and the right to protest, that's the First Amendment. And you can see that for some reason there's just an exception for some reason when it comes to Israel with regards to the First Amendment. The First Amendment is in the United States Constitution. Freedom of assembly, the ability to protest, to come together to present a view. Why is that now suddenly a challenge? I think that the beauty of it is now the Muslim American community is on the forefront for the United States to make sure that those rights remain protected. It is kind of the next civil rights movement of making sure that we preserve the First Amendment, not only for us, but for every American, no matter what their view or their opinion.
So can we go back to Michigan real quick? Right there. Okay, we are seeing, with 27% of the votes reported, President Donald Trump is ahead by 70,000 votes?
65 to 70, between 60 and 70,000 votes.
Can we look at the major counties? So Jill Stein has received almost 10,000 votes in Michigan so far, with 27% of the vote counted. Can we look at the major counties and see what the trends are looking like? Obviously, there's a very clear chunk of votes not counted in Wayne County.
Oakland County is only 68% still. So
Oakland County, there's still more votes to come out of that area. Wayne County is still at 1%, which means they're either having issues like usual, or we will find out by Thursday.
And then Macomb
County has shifted to President Trump.
Still Still President Trump in the lead at
by
15%.
by about 2,700 votes. So okay, there's a massive, well, not massive. There's a projection. Idaho goes to President Trump. California goes to Vice President Harris. I think this was very expected calls, very clear, solid blue and red states. Again, we have to emphasize this election is going to come down to all the swing states where Muslims are strategically placed to make a difference. By chance, by the way.
Yeah.
I wish we had the far-sighted vision to strategically put our people in the most key electoral states. But by chance, we find ourselves in all 7 of the swing states: Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. There's sizable Muslim populations that can determine the outcome of all of those states. And as we have been breaking them down, we will take a closer look at Nevada as they're posed close in an hour or so.
I've always been impressed so far that we've been following the punditry in terms of the major media channels, and with some exception, remarkably silent on the Muslim American community, right? So when they're discussing kind of the razor margins and they kind of, but very few people say, oh, wait a minute, there's a sizable population of Muslim Americans in Phoenix.
Yeah, so we've noticed
in Milwaukee, in Detroit, it's that in Michigan, obviously all over. So it's been impressive about the lack of attention from the national media, but intriguingly that our elected officials, the people actually running for office, have been very focused on making sure that they somehow get the Muslim American vote.
Yes. Dr. Katranji, I think we've provided very detailed analysis. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And we have, who do we have on the line? We have Brother Hassan Shibli on the line. Brother Hassan, assalamu alaikum. Well, before we proceed, where are you joining us from? Tampa, Florida. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. Obviously, we are seeing some very interesting dynamics unfold with the election as we've been looking at the swing states and the determining Muslim vote that could potentially cause either of those states to go one way or another. Well, first and foremost, speak to us a little bit about the Muslim sentiment in Florida. We know Florida is a relatively solid blue state. It has already gone to President Donald Trump. But what has the Muslim community felt in Florida with regards to the genocide, and what has their vote in Florida looked like so far?
I mean, I think it's been consistent with the abandoned Biden and now abandoned Harris campaign is that the Florida Muslim voters, I think very consistent with American Muslim voters across the country, just do not feel right voting for the same administration that oversaw and enabled this genocide. So that's really what it's come down to. Now the question becomes, do they vote for Trump or third party? There is some Muslim support still for voting for Trump despite his terrible rhetoric and despite the Muslim ban he implemented. There's some, I think the theory that he may be more isolationist in America first in his foreign policy. So there's still been some leaning to him. But there's frankly been a lot of Muslims that for the first time ever voted third party in this election. So, I think we saw a lot of third party voters for the first time in this election as opposed to any other time, because it is pretty disgusting when both mainstream presidential candidates from the two major parties are bending over backwards in pledging their loyalty to Israel and its horrific genocidal agenda. So it's been an interesting election, to say the least.
Right. So we see Jill Stein got 42,000 votes in Florida so far, with 97% of the amount of votes reported. How does that reflect in the general sentiment? Was this expected?
Yeah, I mean, part of me is surprised it's not even bigger. I would be very curious to see what her party's numbers were in the last election and to compare that. I don't have access to that data at the moment, but if someone could pull up that data and see in the last presidential election what percent of votes or number of votes she got at that time versus now. But yeah, I think a lot of Muslims either did third party, maybe went for Trump, or didn't vote for the president at all, or put right in wrote in a name. But definitely, there's just very little support for Kamala Harris in this election.
Right. So the Democrats have heavily actually invested in actively campaigning against Jill Stein and against the Green Party in this election, fearing that they would erode their margin of victory. Can we switch over to Michigan for a quick second because I want to get your opinion on a few things? Okay, Michigan, at 28% of the votes reporting, President Trump is leading by about 77,000 votes. So, as we can see here, a large chunk of the votes in Wayne County, Macomb County, and Oakland County are still to be counted. Jill Stein is almost at 10,000. How familiar have you been with kind of the dynamics of the Muslim community in Michigan? Because this kind of has been the center of attention for both campaigns with regards to Muslims. One campaign suddenly kind of pivoted rhetoric out of nowhere, that being President Trump's campaign, trying to appeal to the Muslim vote in Wayne County, primarily in Dearborn and Hamtramck, which are heavily dense Muslim areas. Whereas Vice President Harris's campaign not only kind of enraged our community through rhetoric, but actively ignored us and strategically tried to replace us. How do you see the Michigan Muslim sentiment in comparison to what you saw in Florida or what you see nationwide? And what do you think the impact of the Muslim vote is going to be in Michigan?
Right. Well, I mean, I think we saw the Muslim community come out in favor of Trump at some level, right? I mean, they were actually at his rally in Michigan, if I'm not mistaken, and came out vocally Muslim for Trump. And to be honest, I am neither surprised nor am I disgusted by it. I mean, I can understand the pragmatic position of those that came, and I know some of them got attacked pretty intensely. And again, I did not come out in support of Trump as they did, but I can understand their reasoning and their rationale. But to be candid, I can really understand the reasoning and rationale of people who took any of the three positions. I mean, I've heard, just speaking with a very well-respected Muslim community leader and scientist and intellectual as they were on their way to the and they were still making up their decision of who to vote for as they were driving, and they themselves made very compelling arguments for why someone could vote for Trump, or even, God forbid, Harris, which I think emotionally we're more so against, or vote for third party. And ultimately, they end up voting for third party. But I think there's very compelling arguments for any of those three options because it's such a messy election and problematic on so many levels.
Yeah, and I think Michigan has been one of these areas because of its nature as a swing state, where the Muslim vote has held a lot more significance and a lot more importance. So we've seen the community splinter off into different segments, majority of them not voting Kamala Harris, and I think that trend is going to reflect in the ultimate results in Michigan. Whichever way it goes, we predict it's going to actually be a relatively tight race in Michigan. The Muslim community has cemented itself arguably as a decision-making factor, not just for this election, but for elections to come, where whether you're Democrat or Republican, you will have to come to the Michigan Muslim community to ask for essentially our blessing to win the presidential election or other down ballot elections as well. So it's very interesting that you speak to this idea of people using different rationales for their vote. But essentially the intention is the same, which is to stop the brutality, the death, the killing in Gaza and in Lebanon, and to stop the escalation that is currently taking place in that region. And as we speak, 30% of the vote has been counted. We see President Donald Trump take a lead of about 82,000 votes. Now, there's a lot of votes still trickling in, and there's a lot of counties up north that have kind of reported their voting, which we see is why we see this uptick. But going forward, how do you see the Muslim vote and the Muslim community coming together and working towards building sustainable power nationwide?
Great question. So a couple things. Number one is in terms of this election, and consistent with actually previous elections, it is an important reminder of the power and influence of the American Muslim community. American Muslim community is, very small, right? Less than 1% of the population. Very small numbers relative to the whole population across the country. But we are spread out in key swing states and literally can shift the trajectory not only of that state's election, but of the entire election nationwide, being in a swing state. So we as a Muslim community, when it comes to our votes, do have tremendous power that I don't think has been fully recognized or appreciated by the major parties, which sometimes, begs the question, do they even care about winning elections, or do they just care about fundraising and fundraising numbers that feeds their machine and their political machine? But nonetheless, I think we're further cementing the importance of our Muslim community's influence in this country, and hopefully that can earn us more respect in future elections. Now, the second thing is we are grossly underinvested in the political process. Now, on one hand, I think it has to recognize that the Zionist lobby has its fair share of billionaires that are bankrolling, entities like AIPAC, ADL, and many others that essentially have shifted the U.S. Congress from representing the American people to representing their interests. And that's why Congress doesn't represent the will of the American people. You've seen studies that show about 80% of Democrats and 50 or so percent of Republican voters are against what Israel is doing, but only 8% of Democrats in Congress and 0% of Republicans in Congress have actually taken a position against what Israel is doing. So Israel, the Congress doesn't represent the American people. It represents AIPAC. AIPAC does have its fair share of billionaires and mega millionaire donors that support its efforts. And while the Muslim community domestically may not have the same level of wealth, we do have a tremendous amount of wealth in this country.
Right.
And we do spend over, almost around $2 billion in charitable donations every single year. And if we can just allocate a small percentage of that towards lobbying and political involvement, I think we can really take this country in another direction. But I think we've been lazy or short-sighted. I mean, I've been speaking to one of my millionaire friends now for a year who committed $1 million towards a PAC and has still not donated a cent, as far as I'm aware. And they're all waiting on the next guy to start the first million. It's like, come on, guys, wealthy Muslims, you got to get your act together and start investing in the future of this country.
No, agreed. And I think at this point the conversation really, I think it's very clear that we have shown we can determine elections. We can put pressure on candidates at the very least, and we can change national conversation. I think now we have to start thinking about how to cultivate a culture of engagement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Brother Hassan, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your input and your analysis. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So we see this race coming very, very close. President Donald Trump has taken a lead of about 87,000 votes in Michigan. There's large batches of votes coming from, again, what I suspect are the northern counties of the state, which predominantly lean heavy Republican. If we go down to some of the counties where the vote has still not been reported, let's look at Wayne County real quick. Let's see if there's any change. No change in Wayne County. Walaikum salam. We are joined by Dr. Ahmed Ganim, who is quite the figure. I think he's been the center of a lot of attention.
What a crazy night, huh?
So, as a lot of you may have heard, Dr. Ahmed Ganim was one of the, number one, congressional candidates in the 11th district in Michigan, running as a Democrat. He has been politically active in the community for decades at this point, and he was also, for no apparent reason, thrown out of Kamala Harris's rally. So we're going to have Dr. Ghanem join us for an analysis of the vote. Dr. Ghanem, what do you see?
Well, I think the big picture, because the numbers are changing from a minute to a minute, but I think, as you said before, it's so important for every single Muslim in our community and the people that we were out today since 9 o'clock in the morning, going to the places, talking to people, pushing people to vote. And even we had a car that we went, me and you,
Yeah.
were driving a truck with a sound system, trying to go in Dearborn, which that all the streets are Arab streets, and pushing them to vote. We said like 2 hours to closing the polls, 1 hour, 30 minutes, and we push people to go and vote. And I think the most important thing to see that this is the outcome of the work and the votes. This is what we've been working on as a community for a long time, to get people and understand how important it is for every single vote. Because as you see, some of these races, it's like 100 votes, 200 votes difference, and so every single vote count. And we know there is still, even after all the work that have been done in the community, a lot of Muslims did not vote. Like, even if we
Correct.
reach like, say, 60% or something in from the Muslim voted, we still have 40% of the Muslim did not vote.
Correct.
That's the people that are already registered, and we're not even talking to the people that are not registered at all. So I think, do you agree with me that we see improvement?
Definitely see much improvement. And I think part of the narrowing that we see in a lot of the counties is actually due to the Muslim factor. Now, we were expecting a lot more votes to come in for the Green Party, and that may reflect later on. We do have to emphasize that only 31% of votes have been counted.
Yes.
But as the election drew closer and as the pressure was felt on Michigan as a swing state, a lot of Muslims actually decided to kind of plug their nose and vote President Donald Trump as a direct way.
Which is very, very, unusual.
Unusual,
As we say, that the Muslims that 4 years ago we were talking about the Muslim ban and how Trump was bad. And actually, big chunk of the community were part of the campaign. I was part of the Biden campaign.
And so, and I worked actively as well. Yes.
Volunteer to Biden campaign, push people to vote for Biden. What happened during just 4 years? That's the shift from the enemy, as you said, for the community, now becomes closer to the Muslim community than Harris.
Right.
How is that? You cannot even, that's like a bad dream.
Yeah.
What happened? Like, from your perspective, what happened?
Well, I think number one, the dynamics of the state are so crucial that people felt that immediate pressure. People have been very, very emotional in Michigan about the genocide happening in Gaza. A large chunk of the Michigan Muslim population is Palestinians and Arab. So, by the way, breaking news, we are seeing AP, the Associated Press, called North Carolina for President Trump.
Wow.
North Carolina is a swing state in this election. This is big news. We see that he has taken a considerable lead of about 137,000 votes, which is substantial.
And he's leading in Pennsylvania.
He's leading in Pennsylvania. He's leading in Michigan by about 100,000 votes as well at this point. This is a massive projection.
Yes.
But to go back to your point, I think Michigan Muslims are so frustrated with the Democratic Party. They're so frustrated with the neglect that they've experienced from the Democratic establishment, from having invested heavily in them for 20 years, that at this point, the rage kind of took over their voting choice. And I know a lot of Muslims will continue to vote third party, and I know a lot of the community will concentrate behind that. But I think it does seem like a lot of Muslims are also choosing to directly punish Vice President Harris and the Biden administration for their direct role in enabling unchecked Zionism and the brutality that we have seen unfold.
But is this good or bad for the Muslim community? Because this is a big shift.
Yeah.
Like, this is not something you take lightly, that you shift from the party that you've been loyal to and you've been working with and you've been organizing and volunteering in, to shift to a different party, which actually not just the Republican Party, you are shifting to Donald Trump, which was like, they start when they try to scare Muslims, they said, if you don't elect us, we'll get Donald Trump.
Right.
And despite that, we cannot neglect that there is a chunk of the Muslim community have the choice to vote for Donald Trump today. is that what do you think the effects of that on the short term and the long term?
So on the short term, I think there's definitely shock signals being sent to the political parties, both of them, but specifically to the Democrats. I think the Democrats severely underestimated the Muslim vote. I think, and we'll see this later on, but I think there's been a massive miscalculation on the part of the Democrats. A big chunk of that is a big reason for that is also because the data around Muslim voter infrastructure is really lacking. So the Democrats were heavily reliant on faulty data. And this is a conversation that we as a community plan on addressing much later on. But in Michigan, I think this reflects very specifically. In the short term, these shock signals are very clear to both parties. In the long term, I think Muslims have kind of started undergoing a divorce process. Not necessarily all of them, but we see that we are no longer a boxed-in community. And I think this trend will likely sustain in future elections, where we have actually broken from going one side and putting ourselves in no man's land. Putting ourselves.
So you see this like as part of a growing pain for the Muslim community,
I
or
do.
you see this as a reaction that you will end within 4 years?
So it depends, honestly, on the policies that we see enacted regarding on who comes to power. But I think this sentiment was already there.
Okay.
A good chunk of this sentiment was already there. I don't think that even if Gaza had happened, we were going to see 80% of the Muslim community vote for the Democrats and Kamala Harris. And I always say this because the alliance between Muslims and the Democrats was never an ideological alliance. It was a strategic alliance that came out after 9/11 as a alliance of need. We were essentially kind of taken in by the Democratic Party with what a lot of people are saying, with false promises. They used very flowery language, very flowery rhetoric. They softened the community up, and they gave us very marginal victories in return. But in reality, in terms of drastic policy shifts, we have not seen any. Surveillance is still a massive issue in our communities. Parental rights are something that were not addressed, and that's a sensitive issue to a lot of Muslims, especially in Dearborn, where we saw that situation
But
unfold.
that has nothing to do with the presidency. I mean, there is a lot of local issues and state issues, but if we talk about the president itself, when people talk about issues that culture issues, what the president has to do with this? The president has nothing to do with anything.
We have kind of seen the presidents
Okay.
undertake the rhetoric of pushing these issues on the national stage. Even though you're right in terms of enacting these policies originate at the local level. But the rhetoric that presidential candidates have used in the past few elections to define the political space has been centered around these policies.
Okay.
And these are policies that are not necessarily fully ideologically aligned with Muslims, and Muslims are not necessarily a monolith, but we have quite a large chunk of our community that's ideologically conservative.
Okay.
So I believe that this trend, I definitely don't think it was going to be this drastic, right? But it was already on its way. I think this expedited the process by quite a bit, but I do see Muslims breaking away from the Democratic Party. I'm not necessarily saying going Republican. I'm not necessarily saying going Trump, but Muslims breaking away from the Democratic Party, putting themselves in that no man's land, as I mentioned earlier, and choosing their own political fate from this point on is a very significant move. It is a gamble, but it is a significant one.
Will you think the community can survive in this no man's land when you don't have that much close allies working with you, protecting you?
So I'll take this from two fronts. Number
Okay.
one, I think we're a people of faith.
Okay.
And we recognize that our main ally is our Lord, the one who created us and the one who sustains us. A lot of Muslims have chosen the tawakkul path to this election, which I personally also believe to be something very prophetic. When the prophets and the messengers challenged the existing systems of their societies, and most of these prophets and messengers came from relatively well-off backgrounds and high-status backgrounds, when they challenged these existing structures, they position themselves in very uncertain situations. Is the Muslim community going to survive this? I think we've been in survival mode for so long that we finally want agency over our own political decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it too is who to blame here, because I blame the Democratic Party.
Right.
I blame the establishment, because if you have a base and a solid base like in Michigan, which is supposed to be blue, and the Muslim community in Michigan, they have been in your party for years and years, and you lose this base to someone that was about to start a ban on them 4 years ago, that shows the failure, the amount of failure. I think this is an epic failure
Right.
for the Democratic Party and for the campaign. When some them operatives sometimes they talk to me and say, what should be done different? What could have been done different in this campaign? And I tell them there is tons of things could have been done differently.
Right.
And at least, but if you lose your base, what do you have? And I think it's not just about the Muslim community. I think it's beyond the Muslim community. I think the Democratic Party and the establishment is not really focusing on the base when it comes to the minority, because the base of the Democratic Party is basically minorities coming together. We see it in Muslims because we are inside the Muslim community. But also, if you read or you have some friends, you understand it's happening also in the Latino community. The Latino community is breaking away from the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party never stopped to say, what is happening here? What are we doing wrong? They keep going like stay the course without any changes. And I think the long-term outcome, it might be bad for the Muslim community because it's, uncharted territory that we are stepping in, but also it will be much, much worse for the Democratic Party. And we don't know what will happen tonight, but so far in a lot of areas doesn't look good. So do you think that Muslims can even change their tactics inside the Democratic Party and try to fight their way in? I was kicked out of the Democratic Party. Like someone is asking me, are you still with the Democratic Party? I said, yes, I'm still with the Democratic Party. If they keep me in, they kick me out. So should we as a community fight back to have a seat in, or say, okay, you don't want us, bye, you're gonna leave? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a good chunk of the community has opted for that at this point. I think the frustration coupled with the policy has just been too much for a lot of people. There is a chunk of the community who I think still wants to operate within that infrastructure. And I think that's something that the Democrats need to be aware of, that we do have a sizable amount of Muslims who are still trying within the Democratic Party. Now, we've blamed the Democratic Party. Part of the blame also goes to Muslim structures and organizations that unquestionably pledged their support behind the Democratic Party with no concessions. I mean, I know that the argument can be made that Trump hasn't given concessions either, but we know who Trump is. We know what Trump has been painted as to us. The Democrats have always painted themselves to us.
The funny thing, this is a lot, actually an argument with a lot of Muslims when they talk about, you don't know what Trump can bring to you. He said that I know Trump.
Right.
So he's very open when he's even against me, and when he says he will do something, he will do it against me. And they think that the Dems, they are just serving us lip service, basically.
Right.
It's just like we're not getting a lot of words, a lot of talk,
Right.
but nothing solid. But again, after all these investments between the Muslim community and the Democratic Party, you were talking about divorce, which
Right.
a word that I heard from a lot of Muslims talking about it. Do you think there is anything can be done before going to this divorce?
The Democrats have to re-engage us. Our doors, I think, are open as a community. I think a lot of us gave them the benefit of the doubt until 7 p.m. today. Was Kamala Harris going to put pressure on the Gaza genocide? Were the Democrats going to, 2 days ago, invite Ahmed Ganim back on stage to speak? I mean, I know you received an apology, but you received no accountability with it.
Yes.
This is what is frustrating Muslims a lot, that the Democrats, even though they have put us in this situation, are still paying lip service. Mm-hmm. We are not seeing engagement from them. Mm-hmm. We're not seeing action from them. If people see that, I'm sure people are willing to re-engage, mm-hmm. right? They're not going to get everyone back, mm-hmm. but it is important, clearly, right, for them to get some of us back nationwide. Yes. So it's important for the Democratic Party to reevaluate its policies and its stances on the Muslim community, to choose the votes of the Muslims and accountability towards the Muslims over an untouched relationship with Israel and Zionism.
Yeah, and it's not just the Democratic Party. I think the whole democratic apparatus like the whole system of the Democratic Party that comes with media, that comes with politics, that comes with social work. Like I used to watch Rachel Maddow, for example, for a long time, and she used to cry on air when they put kids in cages, right?
Right.
And we all cried with her during Trump. Then when we saw kids in Gaza being burned alive while still hooked to their IVs, you did not hear a word from her.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, I've been watching you for every single night for the past like 3 years. I haven't even, when I miss an episode, I will watch it in the morning. Every, and I was just like, was that, for me, was that like, that was a shock. This is the most shocking thing to me. When I've seen people that I believe they were sincere or they work for a cause, but Gaza showed us that a lot of these people are not even, I don't know if you can say humans about them, because there is nothing human about, not speaking against the genocide. And you have this platform, and we see a lot of, that's the people that consider a spokesperson, for the Democratic Party and official spokesperson for the Democratic Party, and they say nothing about it. And when we complain, they come up with said like, shut up and sit down. We have important issues to talk about it. That was even hurting. That will hurt us more than their silence. That they don't even understand the amount of pain that we have and the amount of. And you go back and question. All those people stood with the Muslims when the Muslims ban happened. Was that a genuine stand because they really believe in this, or just to
Counter
fight Trump through us? And that's all these questions are legit questions right now to ask as someone been active in the Democratic Party for the past 20 years.
Right.
And I think we as Muslims and as humans live here in Michigan or in any state in the United States, we deserve answers. How does that happen? Where is the soul searching for the Democratic Party to go back and say, how does that even happen? How is from October 7th, 2023 to October 7th, 2024, 1 year, all our statements, all our positions, everything that we talked about, how couldn't be, understand that this is a genocide? And if someone will stop against the genocide, it should be the party of diversity and inclusion and all the things that attracted us to this party. And I guess, I'm venting right now because I wanted to vent. And I think a lot of Muslims, especially the Muslims that were invested in the Democratic Party for a long time, they need to vent, and they need a space in the Democratic Party to understand, to have their voice heard. So this is why I'm asking all these changes that's happening. When we see Trump going to Hamtramck and opening an office there, you see Trump going to Dearborn and drinking coffee with the Muslims and Arabs. Again, this is just an emotional reaction to the neglect and the what we felt during the genocide, or this is really a real change that's happening inside the Muslim community?
Well, I think it's a bit of both.
Okay.
I think definitely people have been very reactive to what they've seen from the Democrats. And I think your rant is spot on. I think your feeling is shared by a lot of Muslims in Michigan. You are not the only one who has unquestionably kind of, voted Democrat as a way for us to essentially put our trust in them, that they will reflect our interests and be accountable to us, right? At least to a degree. But we have not seen that. We have not seen that kind of engagement. We have not seen the return on investment. This has been a one-sided relationship so far. And when the Democratic Party guaranteed Muslims a seat at the table, I think that seat at the table looked more like a child being invited to sit with the adults. But in reality, the child has no speaking power at that table. Sitting at the table doesn't make you a diner. Sitting at the table doesn't give you power, right? If you sit at the table, you sit as an equal. That's where the frustration comes from, in my opinion. That this 1 year exposed that they did not see us as equals. Now, actually, over the last few weeks, with what happened to you and other things, I think it showed that not only do they not see us as equals, they see us as a liability.
Okay.
So I know we're talking a lot about Muslims divorcing from the Democrats. I don't think we've talked enough about the Democrats divorcing from Muslims,
Exactly.
making the active choice to leave our community in the mud and try to replace us with other voters. Why?
So
Because they have to be accountable
Do you believe
to
that
us.
this is really, and I did talk with a lot of people about this, was this a mistake or this was by design?
I believe at some point there was mistakes that were made. But about a month ago, it is my belief that the Democratic Party made the active choice of leaving the Muslims. And this is something that has always puzzled me, right? Because a lot of Muslims were willing to vote Democrat, like I said, up until the very last minute. Why did the Democrats decide to gamble on the election for the sake of Zionism? Why did the Democrats decide? They could have won Michigan comfortably.
Was that ideological move or just a political calculation and election calculation? Because someone was saying, okay, they said, we're not going to get the Arabs and Muslims. How much votes? How many votes? 100,000. Okay, how can we get 100,000 votes in Michigan without the Arabs and Muslims? So if we get people like Liz Cheney that can bring more suburbs white women to the campaign and energize the African American community by presenting the first potential African American female president. So you have two demographics here. You can pull more than like 100,000 out of these two demographics, and that will, avoid having the gap with the Muslim and Arabs. But even though, do you think even because I ran for office, and I think when you run for office, you don't wanna miss on any vote. Doesn't matter.
Right.
So were that really their strategy, you think?
Even if that was their strategy, like you said, it's not a wise one. Why not, with an election being 50-50 in Michigan, why not capitalize on every single vote that you can get? I mean, they clearly need it.
Definitely.
They clearly need it. There's 250,000 Muslims who can vote in Michigan. This could have looked very differently right now. It's still, I'm not saying that she has lost.
No.
That prediction has not been made yet. But the Democrats could have been comfortably cruising in this state according to these numbers. If that was a calculation, it was a wrong calculation because it alienated us for the future. Now, it was a very short-sighted calculation as well. I also believe that it was indeed ideological because why have to put yourself through the pain and time and grief to cultivate all of these new voters to replace a voting bloc and alienate them?
Yes.
This is a multi-dimensional strategy. It's a misguided strategy. And I think it may potentially cause the Democrats the Muslim vote for the foreseeable future.
Definitely, yeah. Okay, Rex, you've been up for 2 hours now. Do you want to take a break?
I will take a break. I will let Dr. Ghanem take over.
We can take Joshua. And Joshua is an ally. Joshua Feinstein is an ally for the Muslim community for a long time. And he has been with the Muslim community starting from Jewish Voices for Peace and other organizations also he created and led. And again, we cannot live as a Muslim community without having allies. And we had, since October 7th, and since the genocide started, we were very fortunate to have so many allies that really helped our movement and really helped our community. And one of those allies is Joshua. So Joshua, welcome, Joshua. Thank you, man, for coming. Thank you.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, what a crazy night, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that you're seeing here, Ahmed, is regardless of how things turn out, it shows that our movement matters.
Okay.
So if you look at our journey from the past 13 months, right? From when we all first got together and the despair we all felt, and we spoke up, and we talked to the administration and we were ignored. Well, we learned lessons from that. And then from there, we went to the uncommitted movement, and we spoke our voice, and we learned lessons from that. And then we had the primaries. And having campaigned with you, boy, we learned a lot of lessons from that. But if you look at tonight and you look at the numbers coming in, regardless of where things go, we see that our movement, our unity matters. That we are here, and after tonight, regardless of the way the cookie crumbles, we'll be here together and we'll move forward. And we are making progress, hence why we're a progressive movement. We're making progress. So it's good to be here. It's good to see you.
That's that. I'm glad to have you here, which is like it's an amazing that since October 7th happened, we did not have like any just 100% Muslim event, just exclusive of Muslims. We always have allies, and Jewish allies like yourself were very, very, I did learn a lot from you when I started running for office, and I always call you when I need anything, and you've been active, you've been going anywhere. So after, I think what happened when this change is happening inside the Muslim community, what our allies think about this? Like, as you said, some people are actually left the Democratic Party. And so what do you take on this?
Can you repeat the question?
So basically, most of our allies, as for the Muslim community, we're working with activists inside the Democratic Party.
Right.
So now you find that some people are not, so like I said, I'm with you, I'm against the genocide,
Yes.
but I want you guys to vote for Harris, not vote for Trump, or not vote for Stein.
Yes.
So some of these sensitive and issues and topics started to pop up. So what do you think? What's your take on that?
First, let me say that
Okay.
the fact of the matter is, so therefore, from a personal point of view, I voted for Jill Stein. Now,
So what do you say about the people that think being in a party is like in a cult? Whatever the cult will give you, you have to worship this leader of the cult.
I mean, I think, look, honestly, Ahmed, I don't really pay attention to that because I think, especially if you look at the long arc of our movement, I want to avoid any circular firing squads, right? I think that we have to keep an eye on the fact that I'm repeating myself, that we all are going for the same thing. We all want peace. We want, as you would often put it, Ahmed, an end to the endless wars. Where we get into disagreement, and it's okay, is how to go about that. So I actually, and I've had many phone calls today where I've vehemently and logically and intellectually disagreed with people on the other end of the call, but at the end of the day, we all wanted the same thing. We just disagreed about how to go about it. Does that make sense? I hope?
That makes all
Yeah.
sense. And this is actually when the press, they contact me and said what the Muslims said about that and what Muslims said about that. I tell them it's not Muslims, it's not Arab, it's an anti-genocide movement.
Yes.
And even if you break down the votes for the uncommitted, you'll find actually the minority was the Muslims and Arabs.
Yes.
The
Yes.
majority of the uncommitted movement,
Yes.
100,000 votes in Michigan, probably like 90,000 out of 100,000 are not Muslims.
Yes.
A lot of Jewish people, a lot of Christians, a lot of atheists, a lot of people from all walks of life. So it's an anti-genocide movement, and this is amazing that the Muslim community and the other communities they were able to come together and create this amazing movement.
Yes.
So what is the future of this movement
That,
after this election?
so I think, well, that's a multi-layered question, okay? I think before we actually decide about, we're at a fork in the road right now. Let's see how the cookie crumbles tonight, and let's see who controls the House, who controls the Senate, and who controls the White House. We'll take that information in, and we will regroup in terms of what that strategy is going to look like. It's multifaceted, depending on those different three levers that are pulled. So I think we'll see. With that, I think we should go to the board to see what's going on. Let's take a look at. So we've got 81.
You're the expert with the data. Remember when I used to call you to ask you about the data? Okay.
Okay. So we've got 81% of the votes in for Pennsylvania. Trump up 51.4% to Kamala Harris's 47.7%. And interesting, you have the other candidates. You actually have 54,000 there, which is not insignificant, as Rex had pointed out earlier. So anything, how are we doing here? So we got Jill Stein actually taking up 27K of that. And again, with Jill Stein, it's not that people talk about her being a spoiler. She's not a spoiler. She's an option because she is the only candidate that said unequivocally, I am the candidate for peace. I want to stop the genocide in Gaza. For
And
me,
also you can see that Chase Oliver got 27,000 too. So it's not, it's the same. It's not just Jill Stein. There was other options too, which is, you know,
Exactly.
I didn't even get any advertising from this gentleman, but obviously he's popular there and he got 27,000 votes and, you know, as big as Jill Stein.
So I want to, from here, I want to focus a bit on North Carolina a bit, because North Carolina, Biden did win North Carolina. I'm sorry, Trump did win North Carolina in 2020. So on the one sense, you could say, well, this is continuing of the trend. Doesn't really say something. But when I looked at how, honestly, how quickly Trump has actually been announced for North Carolina, it does show that subtle shift that's happened this time around. And that's what we're seeing across the board in all these battleground states. If we look at whether it's, you know, they had them up here, whether it's Pennsylvania or Arizona or Michigan, et cetera. I think what you're seeing this time around is that razor close margin. You can see it as a result of the progressive movement. I don't want to take too much, us to take too much credit for it, but
No, it is.
It is.
It is. I was talking to someone from the Democratic Party and told them, you know what, sometimes the data might be deceiving. Because sometimes you look at the progressive party, for example, at the progressive left in the Democratic Party and say, here, those are like less than 10%, we can ignore them. No, because those are the people are the most energized people in the party. So you might be like 10%, but they work more than 50% of the party. Those are the people that, like you or me in the campaign. We did not have any money. We had all volunteers. I had people from the progressive left that they will knock doors. They will go and print things on their own and pay for it. And some of them will spend like 10 hours a day without any payment, without anything. So those people that they do that, those people that the progressive left that actually do that, you cannot replace this. This is irreplaceable base. It doesn't matter even if they are 5%. This is the core of the volunteerism and work in the Democratic Party. And again, this is where the data are deceiving. We say, like, for example, here in Michigan, we have Ferndale. How many activists in Ferndale? Yes, you don't have a lot of activists in Ferndale, 100, 200, but those 100 and 200 activists in Ferndale can actually knock 2,000 doors, 3,000 doors in one weekend. But other people don't have it. So again, as you said, the progressive left, and I think that the anti-genocide movement would not achieve any of the achievements, including the 100,000 votes in uncommitted, without working hand in hand with the progressive left in the Democratic Party. This is a fact, and I see it because I live in Ferndale and I deal with every day with activists in South Oakland County. And I know how efficient and how sincere those activists. And this is why when the Muslims and other minorities, when they came together, we created something. We don't have much numbers, we don't have a lot of resources, but we had this determination and the ability to work and take on big tasks like get 100,000 in 4 weeks. Remember?
Yes, I remember. I think the key here, Ahmed, is again, from tonight, we realize that things are going to ebb and flow. Over the past, so first I want to acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Definitely.
Right? There are people that have been doing decades of work, right? And then we've had people such as yourself been doing decades of work. They have people like myself have been in the game, actively about 5 years. But the past 13 months has really been that blossoming of it. And when we saw the effort that people put in, we have to realize that it's going to ebb and flow, and that's going to have to be okay. But ultimately, we just have to keep sight of our North Star, right? Does that make sense? I hope
it does. It does make sense.
Because when you talk about all the hard work that people have done, when we come out tonight, people are going to perhaps feel there's going to be a mix of emotions. There's going to be a sense of uncertainty. There's going to be a sense of what happens next. We have to, even with the genocide, even with everything going on, we have to take a deep breath and then work and strategize together and figure out what is that next best step to prepare ourselves for the coming weeks, months, and years.
Definitely.
Because our opposition has a 75-year head start.
Exactly. And unlimited resources too. And the night is still young, and we're not sure who will be the next president of the United States yet. So what do you think about the numbers so far?
Let's take a look. 1,251,000 and change for Donald Trump at 51.6%. And you have Kamala Harris at 1.1 million and change.
So you're talking about 120,000 votes different right now.
Yeah, but
That was close to the difference when Biden won by 150,000. So the margin is still it's getting bigger. It's still 41, definitely, but
here's where I think with it being 41%, we got to have Wayne County come in. People have to actually count up Wayne County, and that's when we really see something.
Yes. So it's definitely changing and changing fast. And Wayne County probably will be always Wayne County the last one, right?
Yep.
They always keep us.
I remember that on primary night.
Yeah,
anyway.
it always the end.
So
what? How do you feel? What will be the future of the Democratic Party in Michigan with all these changes? Definitely, it will depend on what's going to happen tonight. But also,
I can't make any prediction because let's see how things go tonight. It can go either way, and then let's regroup with those established Democrats who are still in the Harris camp, and because we have good relationships with them, right? We still respect each other. We still, again, are going for the same goal, just a different way.
Definitely.
In terms of what it means, let's see what happens next.
Yes, and the most important thing is to keep building our coalition, an anti-genocide coalition. You see here a Muslim and a Jewish standing together, analyzing what's happening. So that's alone is great, because I did not, even before October 7, I did work with some Jewish activists, but as a Muslim, I was not really involved that much in a deep friendship with people from the Jewish faith, and that was amazing. That I have people from the Jewish faith that I call them friend. I call them for things even away from the activism. I talk to them about things in life, which is definitely amazing thing for how this movement is evolving and getting stronger. And I think this is the most important thing, is to look forward, regardless of what's going to happen tonight or tomorrow. We have to keep working because we have a lot of work to be done. And the genocide is still happening in Gaza, right? Regardless who will be the next president. It's tomorrow. There are some people still in Gaza and in Lebanon now, because they expanded. They are not sure if they're gonna find their next meal. They are not sure if they can, be safe tonight. And as a father, I look at the videos, and I have little kids, and I cannot even imagine my emotions and how I feel if I come at night and I cannot provide a meal for my kids.
Yes.
I think that will be, I know the kids are suffering, but I think as a parent, I will be suffering more. I will be dying inside.
Yes.
Feeling that I feel like helpless when I see kids are dying there, because they are in the same age of my kids. And I was like, something happened, like when my kids, like, they get hungry for 1 hour, they start crying. So imagine when the kids are hungry for days and days. And when we get involved so much in the work and election and voting and stuff like that, sometimes we forget our North Star. Why are we here, and why are we doing this? Because all of us we're not career politicians, right? You have a day job, I have a day job. Probably tomorrow we'll sleep for 2 hours before we go our job tomorrow. But this is the most important thing, that we feel that we are human, and we have a responsibility toward these people, because we can see them. I wish we couldn't see them and continue our life without knowing there is a genocide. But we had the opportunity to see them live on our phones, and the genocide is still happening. And you said you were in Lebanon recently, right?
Yes,
and you had
yes,
a situation that you...
I mean, so in terms of being in Lebanon this summer, you had the daily surveillance planes that were coming over, and then the sonic booms and such. But that's a topic, because obviously, I have friends and family that I speak to daily, and I think, for the sake of the broadcast, let's move away from that.
No, I'm saying, what I'm trying to say is, and this is personal.
Yes, it is very personal.
This is personal for us. It's not about data.
Personal.
It's not about who wins Michigan or who wins Oakland County. It's about, this is something personal to me.
Yes, it is.
And I got into this because, again, you go there and you see it with your eyes, and it's not even in your phone. Now you are under this threat.
Yes.
And when I see it, when I talk to people, and I follow some people on social media, and 3 or 4 days after that, I found out that they were killed. The people that I was following, young people or youth. And this is, for me, this is like, sometimes I feel like I'm in a dream, in a bad dream. And sometimes I try to avoid watching these videos. And it's easy for us just to ignore it so I can continue my day. If I want to focus at work, I should not watch this video, because if I watch this video, I wouldn't be able to sleep or work for 2 days. This is what we are under here. And this is what when we talk to the Democratic Party, this is not just about something far or one issue. This is our entire emotions and entire life and entire work and entire family here. So don't put it as one issue and tell us, move on, it's one issue, let's talk about other issues. We want to show them this is really something strong. This is something in our DNA. It doesn't matter if we lose the election. It doesn't matter what happened, because kids are dying, and I don't think anything important in the whole universe than keeping or saving the life of the children. And yeah, this is why we're here. This is why we're staying late. This is why we're having this discussion. This is why we have, otherwise I would be sitting in my bed watching CNN, and you would be doing too, right?
I would not be watching CNN.
But yeah, I'm saying, yeah.
But speaking of CNN, they provide some decent data. Let's go back to the data itself. Let's focus in on where things are at Georgia. Can we look at Georgia? Because what's interesting is Georgia has 93% of the votes counted. You've got Trump at 2.6 mil and change, 50.8%. You've got Kamala Harris at 2.4 mil and change at 48.5%. You know, for a data guy, I'm having trouble doing the quick math to see what's left.
Yeah.
Can we do
But
that?
this person, Chase Oliver, is actually is getting more votes than Jill Stein. Wow,
Interesting.
that's very interesting. And I don't know if I was not in Georgia to understand how strong his campaign was, but obviously stronger than Jill Stein so far.
So up until tonight, my whole thought was, as Michigan goes, so will go the nation. As we get into this evening, I start to think, no, actually, and this is my own thought, as Georgia goes, so goes the nation. Because I think that will be the state that, with 93% of the votes counted, when it comes in, if it comes in red, we're probably looking at a Trump victory. If it comes in blue, we're looking at a Kamala Harris victory.
Okay.
And
Can we go back to Michigan? So I want you to take a look at Michigan. You're good with data, while I can, and Rex is better than me in data, so I'm gonna bring Rex, and you can continue with Michigan while I'm bringing Rex. Okay?
Sure.
I'll be back Tuesday.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right, so Rex is going to come on in just a moment, and when Rex comes on, we'll continue the analysis. As you know, we've got a long evening ahead of us. Actually, we have a long several years ahead of us, regardless of how tonight turns out. But we will do our best. We'll regroup. We'll review. So, as everyone knows, Rex is the executive director of Amin, who's bringing us this broadcast. And I want to also say thank you to the Amin organization, because you're helping us bring our voice, you're helping us capture our voice, you're giving us a platform. And this is what really matters. Thank you. So, let's look at the board while we wait for Rex to come on. Let's look at Wayne County, shall we? Wayne County has only 15% voting. Now, this is the biggest county, as you know, in terms of votes. So, traditionally, and we all saw this, those of us who were active together in the primary, we did see that Wayne County, I think, there's some people in the studio here tonight that were at the Mary Waters, and we looked at the numbers, we went home. It took to the next day for Wayne County to come in. As an aside, I do remember Mary Waters calling me up the next day and talking about it. What is my point? My point is that it's going to be a while before what happens over here in Wayne County. The 15%, it might even take till the morning. So either you grab your popcorn or you watch us for a bit or eventually go to sleep. I don't see this really coming in for several hours. So really, those of you who actually were pulling for Trump, I wouldn't get too excited. Those of you that are pulling for Kamala Harris, I wouldn't despair too much. I think it's a long evening to go in the state of Michigan. Oh, my microphone fell. My apologies, folks. Normally we go to a commercial break, but we're going to skip the commercials as it's public television.
All right.
All right. Good to see you, Rex.
Good to see you, Joshua. Thank you so much for the breakdown.